another Western hostage was released in the week between the two Iberian Grand Prix. Jackie Mann, aged 72 when he was taken prisoner, had been a sergeant pilot in the Battle of Britain, attaining ace status by shooting down 5 enemy aircraft, despite being shot down by his own navy in mid-August. Shot down again in 1941, possibly by famous German ace Adolf Galland, he was badly burned and became a founder member of the Guinea Pig Club, the group of servicemen who served as the subjects of pioneering facial reconstruction surgery of Archibald Macindoe. Retiring to the Middle East, he had been taken hostage in 1989 and kept mostly in solitary confinement, without even his reading glasses. On his release, he settled in Cyprus with his wife Sunny and was awarded a CBE in the 1992 New Year's Honours List, but his health never really recovered and he died in 1995. In the US, President Bush announced a unilateral reduction in short-range nuclear weapons and stood down the 24-hour standing patrols of nuclear-armed bombers that had been operating ever since the 1940s. A week or so later, President Gorbachev made similar reductions, one of the few things in the Soviet Union that he still had direct control over. And the long-running civil war in the small Central American country of El Salvador seemed to be coming to a close, as the insurgent Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front came to an agreement with the Salvadorian president Alfredo Burkhardt, and a Salvadorian army colonel was found guilty, a couple of days later, of an infamous murder of 6 Jesuits in 1989 who had been advocating for a ceasefire. As with so many civil conflicts around the world during the Cold War, it had become a proxy war, with the US supporting the government and the Soviets and Cubans the insurgents, and as usual the collateral damage was catastrophic. 60,000 civilians killed, which was double even the highest estimates of the total military casualties, over 5,000 disappeared and presumed dead, and over 1 million displaced either within El Salvador or fleeing into other countries. A few days and a 12-hour drive after the race at Estoril, the F1 transporters unloaded at the second new circuit of the year, the Circuit de Catalunya, at Montmeló, about 30 kilometres 20 miles north of Barcelona. As early as 1987, the Royal Automobile Club of Catalonia decided to try and capture the Spanish Grand Prix from Jerez, which had hosted its first Grand Prix a year earlier. As construction work proceeded at Montmeló, crowds at the southern circuit remained poor, not least due to the remote location and poor access. By 1989 the circuit was finished and superb facilities and infrastructure built, and motorcycle and junior Formula races held with a view to a grand opening in 1992 to coincide with the Summer Olympics in Barcelona. But then negotiations to renew Jerez's contract broke down, and the race moved a year early. As the drivers headed out for their first familiarisation sessions on Thursday, there was plenty to talk about that didn't for once involve Alain Prost and Ferrari. Firstly, as previously announced, Alessandro Zanardi became the 4th occupant of Jordan number 32. Car 32, Alessandro Zanardi. Young Alex lost his sister, a promising swimmer, in a car accident at the age of 13, the same year he began karting. After building his first kart from dustbin wheels and old pipes, he soon progressed to more serious competition, and by 1988 he was entering Italian F3. In 1989 he took 3 poles and 2 podiums, and raced a single F3000 meeting at Dijon. For 1991, he joined the new Il Barone Rampante team, winning his and the team's debut race at Vallelunga and winning from pole at Mugello. With 1 race to go in the season, he is tying for the lead with Christian Fittipaldi and looks to be a good future prospect. Gabriele Rumi had got tired of Olivier Gouillard's underperformance as he saw it and fired the Frenchman. Meanwhile, over at AGS, Gabriele Tarquini had jumped ship as the team looked to be on its last legs. A quick round of phone calls, and Tarquini joined Fonmetal while Gouillard took his seat at AGS, after Patrizio Cantu's preferred candidate Roberto Colciago was unavailable. Pedro Chavez, thoroughly cheesed off with Coloni's inability to get anywhere near even the other cars in pre-qualifying, had refused to drive in Spain, pointing out that he'd only been paid 1/10 of his agreed retainer and was still having to buy his own airline tickets to get to races. With nobody else available at short notice, the team were forced to pull out of the weekend and hope to find someone else by the time of the Japanese Grand Prix. Modena were essentially a dead team walking by this stage too, with Larousse and Minardi confirmed for Lamborghini V12 engines next year, and parent company Chrysler taking charge of the team, which was expected to be wound up at the end of the year. Gerard Larousse, for his part, added to his Japanese sponsorship portfolio by announcing that next year he would be running Japanese driver Ukio Katayama, sponsored by Japan tobacco brand Cabin, who was currently leading the domestic Formula 3000 series. Porsche confirmed their withdrawal from F1 after the fiasco of early 1991, and in the search for a new engine, Jackie Oliver had looked at the V10 Ilmor, but footwork owner Wataru Ohashi refused to allow his team and firm to be even tangentially associated with Akira Akagi in the Leighton House scandal, so Tyrrell's old Honda unit it was, with Akagi creditor Fujibank claiming the Ilmor engine contract as an asset. Michael Bartels was back in the Lotus for one last go this year, hoping he would at least be at less of a disadvantage because nobody else knew the circuit either. The intervening week had also seen the election for head of FISA, and Max Mosley, founder of March Racing and former legal advisor to Bernie Ecclestone in his capacity as head of FOCA, had been elected. He replaced Jean-Marie Balestre, who had been head of FISA throughout the so-called FISA-FOCA war of the late 70s and early 80s. While Balestre was known for his confrontational style, often referred to as dictatorial, there was also a worry that, with the election of Mosley, Bernie Ecclestone's influence within the sport, already very strong, would go unchecked, and it would just become the Max and Bernie show. Curiously, both the outgoing and incoming presidents had had to fight allegations of Nazism. Balestre had been a member of the Charlemagne Brigade, French volunteers in the Waffen-SS, but had always maintained that he had been working undercover for the resistance and fought hard to prevent pictures of himself in uniform circulating. While Max Mosley, for his part, was the son of Sir Oswald Mosley, leader of the British Union of Fascists, who had married Diana Mitford, Max's mother, at Goebbels' house with Adolf Hitler himself as a guest of honour. Max was born in 1940, and after a teenage dalliance with the Union Party, the successors to his father's BUF, he mostly steered clear of politics and went into law. Anyway, back to the racing, and the first Grand Prix at the new circuit could well see the crowning of Ayrton Senna as champion for the third time, because any other outcome required Nigel Mansell to win all three of the remaining Grand Prix. It was a tall order, and he was apparently getting his excuses in early, coming back from home on the Isle of Man with a bout of laryngitis, and then joining in a beach football game, drivers against press photographers, on Thursday. He scored 2 goals, but tripped over his own goalkeeper, Fabrizio Barbazza, and twisted his left ankle. Fortunately, the Williams semi-automatic gearbox means the left foot isn't used as much. Michael Schumacher was fastest in the early Thursday sessions despite crashing early on, and then on Friday it was time for PQ, and once again it was the Brabhams on top with Alboreto third. Fourth, though, was Gabriele Tarquini, an epic effort in his first go in the Fon Metal car, and just missing out was Alex Caffey, improved but thoroughly demoralised. Fabrizio Barbazza did have the satisfaction at least of beating his new teammate. Gerhard Berger set the pace in qualifying as he had in Estoril, but this time there was no Patrese to nip in at the end, and Senna's efforts ended with a blown V12 which left a trail of oil on the racing line, and a brisk Saturday storm ended everyone's chances of doing better. So Berger it was who took the McLaren team's 75th pole position and his own first since Phoenix 1990, with Mansell alongside, Senna third and Patrese fourth. Schumacher was fifth, a good qualifying performance to mark Ford's 350th race in F1, and was followed by the 2 Ferraris, Capelli, an excellent Pirro, and Piquet. The Brundle twins had a great session themselves on row 6, as the Pirelli tyres seemed to like this circuit, with the Tyrrells unusually far back, Modena 14th and Nakajima 18th. New boy Zanardi put the Jordan 20th, a few places behind his experienced compatriot. Hakkinen was 21st and lined up alongside an impressive Tarquini, with the Ligiers making up the back row, and Suzuki, Bartels, who'd demolished his car on Friday, and the doomed Modena Lamborghinis missing out once again, with Van der Poel 8 3/4 seconds off the pace. The pressure was clearly getting to all concerned. Jean-Marie Balestre, running his last driver's briefing, reminded everyone to avoid doing anything reckless at the green light, to which, after a bit of needling by paddock jokers Piquet and Berger, Mansell reacted angrily, and after a brief shouting match with Senna, stormed out. At which point Flavio Briatore poured oil on troubled flames by accusing a lazy of changing tyres in a dangerous position at Estoril. Claudio Lombardi came to a Lazy's defence, and the air turned azzurro before someone split them up, and Balestre called an end to proceedings. Mansell was a little more diplomatic on the BBC later, but not much.
Ayrton next door has been very fortunate with the backing he's had and reliability he's had this year, and I'd say that sometimes with the misfortune that other people have, he should receive his points more gracefully and perhaps say less. He's double world champion already. his odds on to win his third title, and I think he could win it a bit more gracefully. On saying that, I'm not going to give up yet.
Sunday morning dawned wet, and the warm-up saw a goodly number of off-track excursions, but it hadn't set in properly, and in the period between the warm-up and the start of the race, the rain came and went, with nobody quite knowing what to do about tyres. About 10 minutes from the green light, it started raining again. Everyone put on wets, and away they went for the parade lap, only for the rain to immediately stop again. This was going to be interesting, an unfamiliar and relatively newly laid track, already dusty and now slippery, but not wet enough for the tyres they all had on. So, up they lined and away they rather gingerly went, with Mansell struggling with wheel spin and letting Senna and Berger through into first and second, while behind them Schumacher also got away slowly, causing Alesi to take avoiding action and nearly push Prost off the track. Berger led Senna into turn 1, with Mansell and Schumacher behind. Further back, Prix was finding the conditions tricky and was being swamped, with both Pirro and Capelli going past. At turn 5, Schumacher lunged inside Mansell to take third, while at the back of the pack there was a coming together between Boutsen and Bernard that put both out. Schumacher was now looking to take second from Senna, but to no avail despite his best efforts. So at the start of lap 2, it was Berger, Senna, Schumacher, Mansell, Alesi and Pirro in the top 6, with Capelli and Patrese hot on the Dallara's heels, until Capelli tried a bit too hard to get past and spun into retirement with a stalled engine. Mansell had by now gathered himself and caught back up to the Schumacher-Senna fight, taking third place round the outside of turn 12, a gutsy move in a tricky corner on a slippery track. And now he was gunning for Senna, his title rival, as Berger continued to build his lead. Prost was the first to pit for slicks on lap 3, as Mansell continued harassing Senna, both drivers visibly twitching on the slippery surface, with Mansell seemingly trying to saw Senna's gearbox in half with his nose. On lap 5, Mansell dodged out of the slipstream, and in one of the most iconic images in Formula One history, the two rivals went flat out down the main straight, sparks flying, wheels just centimetres apart at something like 175 miles an hour, 280 kilometres an hour, almost touching under braking as Mansell got the inside line into the corner and took second. Epic stuff. Of course, Senna wasn't going to let that be the end of it and fought back, but to no avail. So now Mansell, who had to win this race to keep his title hopes alive, had a deficit of some 8.8 seconds to make up on Berger, with all three leaders still not having switched onto slicks. Prost had come out and set a fastest lap on dry tyres, but just as everyone else was getting ready to make the change, and Hakkinen was punted out of 10th by Alboreto, it started drizzling again. Not to be deterred, Schumacher came in for slicks, as did that man Alboreto, who needed a new nose, and then on lap 9 Berger was in from the lead. But the mechanics removing masking tape from his brake duct saw him stationary for nearly 17 seconds, rejoining 5th. So Mansell was now where he needed to be, in the lead, but he would still have to stop for tyres soon, and that hadn't exactly gone well in Portugal. On the next lap, lap 10, both leaders peeled in together, a straight head-to-head fight between the two crews in neighbouring pits. Senna's crew turned him round in 7.7 seconds, while Mansell's were just a bit more cautious after last time. Senna popped back out, C compounds on the left and the harder Bs on the right, just in front of Berger and still in the lead, with Mansell on Bs all round now third. Berger looked like he was keen to get past before Senna's tyres could warm up, and as they went down the straight he pulled out and was waved through. The Brazilian, after all, didn't need to win, he just needed to stop Mansell winning, and if he could let Berger disappear off into the distance again and hold up the Williams, well, that would do just fine. Before long, Mansell had caught up to Senna again, but also had Schumacher right on his tail too, and the three were running close together, but then it started raining again. Once more, not hard, just drizzling, but enough to dampen the track and catch Senna out at the end of lap 13. He somehow managed not to collect Schumacher and was able to rejoin the track, now down to 7th. So after all that, Berger led Mansell by about 6 seconds, with Schumacher still worrying away at the Williams, then Prost in 4th, a couple of seconds behind the German, Piquet 5th and Brundle up to a fine 6th, though not for long, with Senna just half a second behind, followed by Alesi, De Cesaris and Patrese, who'd briefly led during the tyre stops, but after another cautious William change was down to 10th. Mansell put his foot down and swiftly caught back up to Berger, who was starting to have a bit of a misfire, and by lap 15 he was already right on his tail, Schumacher left behind and looking to retake the lead. Berger, meanwhile, whether through team loyalty or just dogged determination to get a good result after his appalling luck so far, was not letting Mansell through, out-dragging him down the straight when Mansell tried the same tactic he'd used on Senna earlier. Behind them, Senna and Alesi had both passed Brundle and Piquet into 5th and 6th, and Alesi was racing Senna hard. Finally, on lap 21, Mansell got alongside Berger into the tight Repsol right-hander, and the pair nearly touched as both encountered understeer under braking, but once again Mansell toughed it out and retook the lead. Schumacher was rapidly approaching the Tyrolean too, until he fell foul of the conditions and spun, getting back on the circuit behind Prost. As the race reached its 1/3 distance mark, De Cesaris became just the 5th retirement, dropping out of 8th when all his electronics went dead, and he was joined a couple of laps later by Alboreto with an engine failure. And just then, Alesi was given a 10-second stop-go penalty for his swerve at the start. He fumed into the pits, did his time, and left now 9th behind Leto and Brundle. By now, as half-distance approached, Mansell was cruising, keeping well ahead of Berger with Prost 3rd and pulling away from Senna, who seemed to have something wrong with his car, as he was now 12 seconds behind. On the halfway mark, lap 32, it was Mansell, Berger, Prost, Senna, Patrese and Leto, with Schumacher 7th and Alesi 8th after their respective problems. Alesi had the red mist down and got past Schumacher, and they all moved up by 1 when Leto stopped for tyres, and then another one Berger pulled in to retire with yet more engine trouble, his 7th retirement in 14 races this year. So that meant Prost was up to 2nd and Senna 3rd, but a charging Patrese was getting close to the Brazilian's rear wing, and soon breezed past without too much resistance. Clearly something was up with Senna's car. Soon enough, Alesi was also charging up behind him, lapping new boy Zanardi as Mansell was having his own traffic troubles, shaking his fist at Brundle, who was busy chasing Leto for position and hadn't noticed the Williams arriving. Alesi bullied his way up into 4th and immediately left Senna in his dust and set off in pursuit of Patrese in the podium, but Patrese's lead was over 10 seconds and there were now only 10 laps to go, and the Paduan just needed to put his foot down a bit and stay ahead. With a couple of laps to go, there was a coming together between Morbidelli and Zanardi, and as Gianni rejoined the track, he managed to harpoon his teammate and knock his wheel off. Biscotti would be in short supply at the post-race briefing at Minardi, but both had at least gone far enough to be classified, while Zanardi was able to recover and keep going as Nigel Mansell cruised home to become the first ever winner at the Circuit de Catalunya, and keep his championship hopes alive, with Prost taking 2nd and Patrese 3rd. Alesi was 4th, and Senna had to be satisfied with 5th, in a car that was handling very badly for most of the race, with Schumacher picking up the final point as he continued his streak of scoring in every race for Benetton. Gugelmin and Leto were 7th and 8th, Zanardi a praiseworthy 9th on his debut even after his late accident, ahead of Brundle. A thoroughly dejected Piquet, who'd made 3 tyre stops and had his car set up for the wet, was 11th, and 2 laps down. Then the 2 bent Minardis, Tarquini scoring his first finish since Phoenix on his Fonmetal debut, and the trio of Pirro, Modena and Nakajima, who'd all made exactly the wrong tyre choice and ended up 3 laps down. So, exactly what Mansell needed, and Senna's woes gave him just a little leeway. He now needed to outscore Senna by 16 points from the last 2 races to end level on points. So if Mansell won once and came 2nd once, with Senna not scoring, it would come down to the number of wins, 6 each, and then the number of 2nd places, 2 for Senna, 4 for Mansell. Now, it was a long shot, but you never know. For his part, 2nd place for Senna would secure him the title in Japan, whatever Mansell did. McLaren had brought 7 cars to Barcelona in a bid to sew up the Constructors' title at least, but their woes here and Berger's awful luck so far this season meant that Williams were back on top again, while Gerhardt himself looked like losing 4th place in the title race to Prost, whose season had been just as bad. And so, once again, the title could be resolved at the penultimate race in Japan. The world would have to wait 3 weeks to find out. And you will all have to wait too, because I'm off on my holidays, to the land of Gerhard Berger, Jochen Rindt, Niki Lauda, Joe Gartner, and a man who will make his debut in Japan.